Opinion by Christopher A. Holder. Preface. I will start this work of nonfiction with a disclaimer and a warning. I have been bent out of shape for the last decade or so with aspects of society, at first that which only affected me, but crazed as I am, exposing my mind to as much as possible has repeatedly shown me new levels of my own foolishness, forcing attempts out of me to grasp concepts larger than mere personal perspective. I imagine most that happen across my work will stop before the prologue's end. The reason for this statement is due to my belief that what I write here will spark feelings of hurt, anger, and or helplessness at some point in all who venture forward. I admit this with my own feelings of indignation and agony. I know that there will be subjects I write out which will immediately ignite disagreement, disgust, and denial just within myself alone. Continue at your will, desire, keeping this in mind, so when you are filled with wrath, disapproval, affirmation, joy at my words, you seek only to step away from this blasted book, rather than turn your thoughts, feelings, opinions into action. Now I can almost hear some say, well, what's the fucking point of continuing 1 second longer if your only purpose is to piss me off and get me to quit? A more honest statement could not be made. My only response is, do whatever the fuck you want. While I do not intend to cause harm, validate injustice, evil, sound bigoted and or even hateful, I do not write this warily, nervously, or with caring intent of others' feelings or ideals in my efforts to relay my experiences for any still reading, listening, after dropping the horrific F-bomb. The first of many tests, as the reader-listener, is what I guess you could call that. If simple words deemed uncouth, immoral, disreputable, or foul are the line in the sand for you, I do not know how to write my perception of truth in a manner that you will choose to listen. I make these statements not to judge who you are, nor judge myself above or below you, but to draw attention to the instinctual behavior I witness of human beings to reject a truth while engaged in some form of communication, function, daily interaction, because a word an individual uses that we relate to differently. What power does fuck have? What physical existence, action does the word, spoken or written, possess in and of itself? This is just one of the messages I hope my scribblings will contain. I have grown tired of hearing words used to manipulate, misunderstand, label, judge, misrepresent ourselves, as if those very words utilized our truth. The whole process reeks of hypocrisy, elitism, despair, naivety, as I will sound throughout these pages. When I finally forced myself to sit down and begin this endeavor, it was after a few years of perhaps inadequacy, incompetency, apathy, ill-fated days. Honestly, you could insert any number of excuses. I don't doubt I felt the emotions of all listed above and more, but my hope was I wanted this book to be perfect. I had a plethora of research and wording and subject matter, and at the end of it all, I decided it was entirely worthless. Just opinions, trying to validate my own opinions, hoping that would authenticate these opinions in your mind. As if that is what defines or determines truth. What horseshit. I think I finally came to this conclusion when I was reading the autobiography of Ozzy Osbourne. He made statements about the trials of writing his own book, and while it inspired me for sure, I think it helped me see that what I was doing wouldn't change the point I was trying to discuss. So I guess what I'm saying is, don't take a fucking thing I say as truth. Do not believe one word or support one phrase or perceived idea. All of it is my perspective, and more than likely inaccurate. I do not have anything else in this format that I know how to communicate, and I hope you'll see why I think this. Because of haste, lack of experience, education, I will no doubt play loose and fast with what subjects further on, speculate where I have little understanding, and make absurd statements that intelligent, sane, moral human beings will find hilarious, moronic, and or probably at least sometimes appalling. I'm also sure every individual will have their own opinion on every idea, action, and environment so long as there are individuals and records of them. While all these statements may seem antagonistic and or ludicrously vague, I really don't want people to think I know what I am talking about, because honestly, I don't think I understand, comprehend, or even on a basic level grasp the most rudimentary principles of the upcoming topics. I think all people should question every narrative, opinion, and or action using critical thinking, comparing it to truth, bringing their own ideas to further expand the comprehension of truth for every human being. Any claim, even vaguely related to history, fact, science, I think all people should question every narrative, opinion, and or action using critical thinking, comparing it to truth, bringing their own ideas to further expand the comprehension of truth for every human being. Any claim, even vaguely related to history, fact, science, or culture that I make should be double-checked by you, all of us, and not just the ones I make either, but certainly those written here. Hopefully you see what I see, the feeling of being on the brink of something revolutionary, game-changing, insert whatever cliche for hope and change making things better that you like. I swear my mind wants to believe it is right there, but I can't seem to figure out a satisfactory way to draw attention to it. It's why I don't think I'm the best choice for this undertaking. Man, just thinking of how pathetically contradictory I will sound throughout this. Need a cigarette. Sorry about that. As I'm sure you can see, my writing will fluctuate wildly at times. All the time. I catch myself... Sorry about that. As I'm sure you can see, my writing will fluctuate wildly at times. All the time. I catch myself hoping someone reads this that can make real sense of it all. That isn't the right way to consider it, though can't control others, the future, or even my own life at times. I just gotta do the best I can, right here, right now. Yes, of course, I will be editing, frequently and at the end, but I have yet to meet a perfect human being, and I am not an exception. I will try to fix spelling, grammar, and even errors of interpretation. However, I think that removing the natural progression of my thoughts, opinions, and or feelings would only undercut the message I seek to put forth. From what I have experienced, all human beings will feel something, sometime, about anything. You name it. And I think some of the worst reactions to these feelings are made when we don't want to recognize them. So I'll sound a little crazy at times, saying one thing, then, even maybe next sentence, calling myself out on my own shit. Just another warning of what's to come further in. One last thing before getting to the heart of the prologue. One last thing before getting to the heart of the prologue. I do apologize for the methods that I've chosen to circulate this book. As I will detail further in, I desired this work to be free of monetary influence, motivation, and even compensation. However, when you break it down, the fundamental core of that idea is a little daunting. I mean, if the goal is to receive literally no funds from the publishing and or creation of this book, then how do you market it, or produce it for that matter? With that in mind, after typing it all up and editing the audio version, I have posted the document files on a website I pay for, and on free social media websites applications. Now, without further ado, let's get started with a little personal autobiography. While I'm sure the last thing anyone wants to do is sit through my self-therapy session, life story time, I believe that I have absolutely no right to compare the actions, opinions of others in current past affairs with my own views as if I possessed truth because of intellect, excellence, authority, wealth, virtues, genealogy, perspective, insert whatever word you feel it fits someone believing they have more rights or are above greater than another. Of course, I will inevitably do this whether intentionally or not. While I'm sure the last thing anyone wants to do is sit through my self-therapy session, life story time, I believe that I have absolutely no right to compare the actions, opinions of others in current past affairs with my own views, as if I possess truth because of intellect and excellence, authority, wealth, virtues, genealogy, perspective. Insert whatever word you feel fits someone believing they have more rights or are above greater than another. Of course, I will inevitably do this, whether intentionally or not, due to the sheer fact that all I can use in this medium are words, and there is only I. So first thing first, got to jump under the 18-wheeler myself to kick things off. There will be a lot of moments that are not good, certainly in my mind, and I'm sure if any do read this, a few will find atrocious injustices. That perception may lead to the conclusion of correction being necessary. So be it. Again, I can't control others, the future, or even my life at times. I think that last one, though, you shouldn't ever stop trying. I can't allow failures of the past and present to predetermine what failures I reap in the future. I will fail in this area daily, whether I like it or not. I don't think humans will ever be perfect in the way I comprehend the word, but striving to achieve it, honestly and with a reflective, open, patient mind, is the only successful common denominator I see in our history of trying to improve, advance, evolve. Obviously, being as this is my recollection of events, others involved in their occurrence may disagree with my interpretation of them. I won't even try to pretend that I am more correct than they, or that I am even close to accurate in the slightest. Memory can be a funny thing. Also, obviously, for the sake of those same individuals, all names that do get used, except immediate family and culturally relevant ones, will be changed in this account. I do this to protect all those who I may cast in a negative light, because of the reasons stated previously, and I know I wouldn't take too kindly to being blasted publicly after minding my own damn business. That being said, I am positive the description of events will leave no doubt in those individuals' minds as to whom I refer. Then, if they so choose, they can shine a light on the matter. Let's be honest. Yeah, I think this has a 99.99 so on percent chance of going unnoticed and unread by 99.99 so on percent of people. I could also be wrong, so I shouldn't play around with the impact I might have on another human being's lives for my own selfish whims. However, I also suck ass at just about everything I have ever done. When you hear that, you may think I'm being hyperbolic or exaggerating to some degree. I honestly think to the contrary, and I like to think I've swayed a few to my side, here and there, in some fashion over the years. Literally from birth, I apparently had a death wish, placing myself in situations that were more than likely to end in disaster. Whether it was playing in fire ant hills, dog food bowl at the end of an unfinished porch, butter knife in the socket, or just the good old-fashioned drink chemicals trick. My natural attraction to Murphy's Law is apparently inherited, according to my parents. We, before I can rightfully remember, lived in Texas and slowly moved our way up into Missouri. Our house in Raytown, beautiful ocean blue with white trim and big fenced-in yard, is the first memory of a house I can actually picture. The nostalgia of the oldest maternal first cousin and I finding a dead raccoon, going to my first Royals baseball game, and the first taste of Mom's homemade donuts. Man. But those are not the most vivid in my mind's eye. I was around the 3 to 5 year old range at the time, and a late night pillow fight went wrong. My dad and I got a little overzealous, and I broke my leg, having absolutely no coordination and placing it at an awkward angle to brace for impact. Pretty sure I even told the nurse doctor it was my dad's fault, which I imagine was totally non-anxiety inducing to reassure the nurse that a pillow fight had been the cause. Yes, I know. This has nothing to do with putting your mind to a task and failing or physically, mentally having no talent. I suppose from what I am told, I learned to walk fairly young, which I guess could be contradictory point to the statement I'm defending. But I never really felt it was that spectacular of an accomplishment. I was pretty proud of my reading ability for a long while, but that's just because I mistook lengthy, over X amount of time, trained skill for talent. However, I'm genuinely grateful to my parents for their dedication to encouraging my love of reading. While I can't remember anything else, even environmental details, I do recall before the broken leg and Raytown, my father reading Dr. Seuss and its kind to me frequently. He would follow the words with his finger, reading slowly and precisely, desperate to impress. I would act as if I too could read when it was only mimicry. I think this gave me some of the passion I have for knowledge, reading, and writing that I maintain to this day. I attacked books with a fervor when I was younger, especially those of a fantasy science fiction nature. However, I also had a much larger and more influential book during those same years, also thanks to my parents. God, religion, or the Bible is pretty much the end-all be-all to my family, extended included. This sucked especially hard, I feel, because it was two alternate Christian religions that they really wanted me to see the vast differences between. Some of the not-so-fond feelings I remember from those same aforementioned years are those of incompetence, dejection, and confusion. You see, my mother is restored Latter-day Saints, while my father is Roman Catholic. What's the difference? The whole fucking world to them, and not a single goddamn thing if you asked me then, and if you ask me now. sure, as a kid 8+, I would have spun you the narrative of the three books Mom had, versus just the one in my dad's religion, or the ancient traditions of my dad's religion versus the persecution of my mom's religion by my father's religion, or the many offshoots of Mormonism as opposed to the solidarity of Catholicism. Even then, however, I still had doubts about the true essential differences between the two. What I did know for certain was that it was a major source of stress, and looking back, potentially the cause of the overzealous manner I felt I was raised. While my parents were the classic definition of mid-Western fundamentalist Christian, my upbringing wasn't just a string of human rights horrors like memories would play in my head at times. I remember us being poor, but not destitute when we lived in a duplex, also in Raytown, and I had a good friend, Keldar, who I try to focus on when looking back. We did all the silly, nonsensical actions boys 5 to 7-ish get up to. We explored the neighborhood, making up wild stories and eating bugs, built a fort where a small portion of trees and brush grew, played sports, Nerf guns, toys, and occasionally my parents allowed me over to his house where I got to watch him play his Sega Genesis. A lot of stuff we did was usually his idea or because he had it, not because his family was wealthier than mine, though they could have been. I didn't pay attention to a whole lot at that age. I believe it had more to do with where my parents spent their money. Private schools, Christian especially, will not be overlooked in this book. Regardless, it was mostly fond memories, though short-lived, as we couldn't live in a duplex forever. Growing family, it wasn't very close to the school, so on and so forth. I hope those were the reasons, at least. I had never witnessed nor heard my parents be racist in any direct manner. I thought my time at the duplex was solid evidence against this kind of perception in general, as there was perhaps one other kid as white as I was nearby, and it didn't seem to mean a thing. We didn't see him as much, maybe because he was more than a block or so over. Who knows? This being some of my earliest real memories, I sometimes wonder if age just blinded me to the harsher realities I deemed as lies, armed with the talking points I was told. Like my first harsh reality encounter with the authoritarian aspect of humans during this time. My ass still hasn't forgotten what happened when, instead of checking in, I decided it would be okay to go inside Keldar's house real quick and play his new Power Ranger game with him. I was not allowed to go into any house or even off the block. Hell, not out of sight of our house, meaning from the window, just so we're all on the same page. Sometime later, the sun had started going down. His grandmother informed me that my parents were waiting outside. I'm sure you can surmise the rest. Ah, Center Place Restoration School. How I fucking loathe the institution with every fiber of my being at times. I think I should thank them, though. I believe they helped me develop a serious distrust of popularized figures and tropes. As I said before, while I don't believe my parents ever made what could be considered low income, they did spend a good little chunk of change on sending my younger siblings and I to a private school, specifically a Christian one. I definitely hold the opinion that our lives would have been just a hair simpler if they hadn't blinded themselves to the benefit I definitely hold the opinion that our lives would have been just a hair simpler if they hadn't blinded themselves to the drawbacks, benefits of private education. Mostly because I don't see a true difference between private and public education. What I did see during those years was my parents trying to make ends meet, by whatever means they felt they could, being at one another's throats over honestly name it. Once again, I wasn't concerned enough to figure out the details behind the volume. As for distractions to this, not many. My parents really didn't give much leeway when it came to television and video games during my childhood, so books took its place. I found that books could take me anywhere, especially fictional places, make me someone different, and change my perceived reality, albeit for a short time. I would also discover that they were a gateway to any knowledge I so desired. So long as I could read, I could learn. This, of course, was not what CPRS was about. No. They followed the standard educational format of This, of course, was not what Center Place Restoration School was about. No. They followed the standard educational format of shove our version of our opinions on what education you need down your throat. Except, being religious, got an extra class in there. Not that it was necessary. Religion pretty much coded every damn class to some degree. This is going to be a tough subject, still gets my blood boiling. This, of course, was not what Center Place Restoration School was about. No. They followed the standard educational format of shove our version of our opinions on what education you need down your throat. Except, being religious, got an extra class in there. Not that it was necessary. Religion pretty much coded every damn class to some degree. This is going to be tough. This is going to be a tough subject. Still gets my blood boiling. As if, somehow, I have a right to preach about this at others. Moving on. Kindergarten, to the best of what I recollect, felt awkward, but not all bad to any degree. It could have been first grade, but I'm fairly certain it was a Wednesday prayer service in kindergarten. I recognized a lie, consciously. Center Place Restoration School was like most private schools with a strict dress code, or in their case, a uniform. Every Wednesday, all the students got gussied up in slack skirt, a button-down shirt, a tie, and a cardigan sweater. We would then gather in an auditorium, sit in the pews according to class, listen to a, more often times than not, dry sermon, then share prayers and testimonies. For any unfamiliar with the concept of testimonies, it's the practice of finding an excuse to prove God wherever you see the smallest opportunity to tell a faith-affirming story. Not a very nice assessment, that. I would come to loathe growing up as the fence between two overbearing, obey religions. I would come to loathe growing up as the fence between two overbearing, obey religion, represented by my parents. All the while, hearing from all sides the proof of God's eternal presence, power, knowledge, love, etc. I couldn't ever think of a single thing that I had witnessed I could classify as God speaking to, impressing upon, or even stirring my soul. But everyone in my family, friends, and even strangers had it. No matter what their religion. Shit! I would come to loathe growing up as the fence between two overbearing obey religion represented by my parents. All the while hearing from all sides the proof of God's eternal presence, power, knowledge, love, etc. I couldn't ever think of a single thing that I had witnessed I could classify as God speaking to, impressing upon, or even stirring my soul. But everyone in my family, friends, even strangers had it, no matter what their religion. So every Wednesday till that fateful day, if I did get in line to share, it was with a prayer. I'm not sure if I've properly explained up to this point just how shit I think I am at, well, everything, verbal communication of any nature at any time being no exception. I don't know what caused me to snap that morning. While it could have been I had seen and been part of enough testimonies where I didn't see it the same way as the ones telling, or perhaps a desire to fit in with my family and peers, I believe I just got tired of feeling fake. I have never felt good at speaking, and prayers were no exception, even then in my young mind. I would finally get to a microphone, and I would fumble about words, forgetting my next thoughts as my brain raced with distractions. No matter how much I practiced before getting to the front, or how sure of the ideas I wanted to speak to God about, I couldn't get it out of me without screwing up pronunciations, repeating myself, or just standing there, silent, lost. I, in a very silly manner, finally decided enough was enough, and I told a simple testimony of praying in a hairy situation, then it all works out. Your standard ABC act of God that you'll hear from multitudes of individuals, not exclusive to Christianity either. Almost instantly upon being thanked for sharing, I felt like a train had driven into my stomach. I couldn't help but think of what kind of trash and an evil person I was for having lied. And for what? Recognition, a sign, acceptance, inclusion, and it wasn't lying about the prayer or the near miss that ate me up inside. It was the fact that I had lied for such a silly reason as inclusion over an event I knew was just cause and effect. In the end, I was still left in doubt over whether I had proper faith. Duh. Just because you didn't get fucked about in a moment, you could have, doesn't automatically make it the hand of an immortal, supreme being. That road goes always too. Good things in life, bad things, doesn't matter. Chucking God at a scenario in hindsight serves more as an excuse than explanation. How does that saying about excuses go again? My Christian rule of law parents were so fond of the cliche, and it just escapes me now for some reason. Not like being devastated as a young child helped anything either. I was ashamed and felt admitting such a sacrilege to my parents would only bring punishment. So I pushed my feelings down, stopped looking for the lightning bolt, and did not learn my lesson even slightly. I would make more swings at lying for a testimony to feel a connection at least on 2 other occasions, and neither would accomplish anything more than the first. Religion was such a huge part of my life in those years. I just couldn't come to terms with the lack of faith I felt. How could I be so distraught, so unsure, when I was taught, well, religiously, to understand, please, praise, and plead with God on His word, will, desire, and or commands? Luckily, as I was very young still, day-to-day trials would provide new reality-shattering events to overshadow this one. The realization of being a monster in human flesh has the tendency to dominate one's mind from its genesis to conclusion. I first recognized this characteristic in myself in my first grade year. My parents had moved us to a little dead-end street on the edge of town where life would proceed to undermine their desires to shelter their offspring. The neighborhood was older in relation to the city itself, but also in terms of its occupants. Very few kids were even within blocks of our new house, but a couple of kids, Lotarian and Basar, would visit their grandfather during summer and soon became part of the few friends I had for the years we lived at that house. This was a drastic shift from the previous neighborhood, but another drastic shift was the age of the aforementioned friends. While Basar had only a year or two on me, Lotarian was 14. If my memory can be trusted, he had a wealth of knowledge that blew the hinges off a very closed mind. He would reveal things like swear words, even more Christian religious variants, and, perhaps unwittingly, some dynamics of power and control. You see, as open to speak about anything as parents seem to love saying they are, I came to see this as doublespeak, for they were open to grill me about any topic I would so much as hint at. In other words, from my perspective, it was all about how my questions impacted their fragile, astute, righteous lives. Let's not get it twisted. I don't speak about the stupid cliche, tell the truth, or it'll be way worse. Fucking stupidity that we'll discuss later, as the point of being truthful in such a situation isn't to escape justice. It's to understand why it's necessary, and seeking it for oneself as an example for others to not fear doing the same. Yeah, I know that sounds pretty fucking sanctimonious after crudely judging my parents' attempts at raising me. What I referred to earlier are the little questions that you have when exposed to other human beings, some of whom may have vastly different lifestyles, and mannerisms, no matter race, religion, gender, or economic status. While I didn't understand the cause for my parents' reactions at times, I understood that certain topics quickly spiraled out of control down avenues my young self couldn't have anticipated, usually stirring up indignation, dejection, confusion, internal contention, hell, just straight up hurt feelings. Most importantly, it would have normally led to confrontation, but my family was the iron fist type, especially in the beginning, a dictatorship as they hilariously called it. If I were to make a stand, and I would dare only a few times, it would only be with the certainty the figurative hill was worth physically dying over. That ate-up mentality may have given birth to my very firmly believed statement about their shitty handling of what honesty I would give them. As whiny, childish, bitchy, ungrateful, spiteful as I sound, no one can or will ever convince me that when someone close to you comes to you with knowledge or habits you don't approve of, the appropriate response to them is to interrogate about those subjects, get emotional over those subjects, push your talking points on those subjects with no concern of how your own actions, delivery could be contradictory to the beliefs, desires, ethics you are preaching. I ain't a parent though, so what the fuck do I know about how to raise a kid? I'm off topic. So the point is that when my parents trashed my ass for finding a Britney Spears poster under my bed, there was no way I was going to say a word about the game of Truth or Dare Lotarian Bassar and I would play when secluded. While that twisted game drew in a few others briefly over the years of its occurrence, it would frequently be us three. Lotarian and Bassar had their own home issues, I have no doubt. Of course, it wasn't really mentioned outside of who had the stricter parents. Kid shit, and exactly why, ignorant as I was an easy mark. Far too eager to close any gaps in my knowledge so I wouldn't be naive or sheltered. At the same time, though, with that in mind, who was really taken advantage of? You see, I never, not once to this day, saw myself as the victim, or felt duped, manipulated. I saw myself as the manipulator. When these games kicked off, as not only did I eagerly participate, but sought to include others, frequently proposed it as an activity, and truthfully understood that I had to garner as much information both physically and mentally as I could. It was not a matter of if, but when my link to knowledge, outside what my parents deemed acceptable, disappeared. I was a little over 8, though when those events began to occur and already deemed myself a monster at the worst of times. I was a little over 8 when I was a little over 8, though, when those events began to occur, and already deemed myself a monster at the worst of times, and at best of times knew that I had been sold a lie as I dealt with the mental fallout of my baptism. Turning 8 years old was a big deal in our house, as it signified the age of accountability. And so at some point at 7 years of age, my parents actually sat down to seriously discuss how they were different. They were of different religions. None of it really made sense then or now, but I took it extremely seriously. It felt like I was being asked which parent I loved more. It was in these times I would scare the shit out of myself, possibly for the rest of my life. First grade felt intense compared to kindergarten, but little did I know the steady ramp-up in difficulty was patty cakes compared to humanity, just in general. My first grade teacher set everyone abuzz when she announced to everyone that everybody in the school would get to bring in a collection of theirs to showcase. We'd get to make a little exhibit on our desks, and each grade would go to the other classrooms to see each other's displays. My problem, I quickly discovered, was that my family seemed poorer than the average in the school, and couldn't afford to get me much of any kind of collection. Now I had a few Legos, but someone convinced told me Legos didn't count. This, of course, did not seem to hold true, as not only did I see multiple Lego sets, but other ridiculous sets I couldn't believe cut it. First time as a child experiencing the dumbass principle, it doesn't matter what, so long as you turn something in. I already had been taught about what comes to those who try and make excuses. So I told my teacher I didn't think I had a collection and didn't bring anything in. It was fine though. We could just leave my desk out of the circle of desks with presentations. Not fucking good enough. She was the 6th grade teacher, an elderly woman who, if you did not see her outside the classroom, you would believe was born with a permascowl. And something about my empty desk in the corner screamed at her. As she came around the bend, she pushed through the desks to stand at my empty one, and bending down to my eye level, she asked me with a no fucking nonsense attitude where my collection was. Now I would imagine if you're an adult with a kid, an older sibling, an employer, manager, teacher, if the kid, sibling, employee, student asked you with an attitude, a question about where something was that obviously wasn't there, bet you'd have some choice words to reply with, even if just something sarcastic. Now, how do you think they feel when you, the motherfucker supposedly leading by example, do some same-ass retarded shit? But I can't just respond off the cusp to her. If what I respond with can be interpreted as sarcastic, silly, or antagonistic in any way, well, that's disrespectful backtalk. If I say anything that could be seen as an excuse, well, we've already discussed that. So I just tried to become even smaller and weakly mumbled, I don't have one. Excuse. Next fucking jacked up question was how. Obviously, all the other kids had at least brought something in. They had tried. I just wanted to scream that just grabbing random items from the house wasn't trying. But how can I argue with 1, obviously, teacher, 2, the fact that I knew I hadn't really tried, and 3, I hadn't because I was raised at that point and beyond about the letter of the law. Rules were there for a reason and had to be obeyed. I owed nothing that met the criteria as I understood it, so I thought I made no excuses by coming in honestly, even if it was empty-handed. Au contraire, I could see in her eyes, and I thought of all the spankings I would be getting for, at that time, my conceivable life if I made a scene of any kind. So like the good little dog I was, I barely managed to squeak out 2 no's when, in front of the entirety of 2 classes, she ended her grandiose speech about dedication, intelligence, slothfulness, and entitlement, and asked me again if I really had no collection to share with the school, followed up with a she couldn't hear my first reply. When it was finally over, I told one of my closer friends at the time what a bitch she had been. Remember, this was a religious private school, so I'm sure it isn't nearly as surprising to any of you as it was to me in that moment when my friend responded with malice. Bam. Power Dynamics 101, or as seems to be the popular reference these days, politics. You see, that friend and I, while we had started out close, were quickly drifting apart, starting after I unwittingly sold him out. Not only was his grandmother a teacher, but so too his mother and father, the latter also being minister, missionary, and member of the school board. They had far different issues than my family did as well. My friend's parents had a house on the outskirts of town, and it was a jaw-dropping first of extremely few sleepovers I attended there. They owned a decent-sized house, and it had more land than I had ever seen any family own yet. Also, since it was kind of a farmhouse, he had dirt bikes, bows, and guns. Oh yes, a little .22 rifle and a 14-gauge shotgun. With his dad's supervision, I got to shoot my first gun and make a huge fuck-up when I excitedly told my parents. Now, like I have repeated multiple times, I didn't pay a whole lot of attention to shit outside of my personal world, which is why I probably assumed it was done and over when my parents swore I wouldn't get to go over there again. I have no idea what the conversation between his and my parents sounded like. I can't imagine it was good, because after I said those words about my buddy's grandmother, the gloves came off. He accused my dad of being cool with pedophilia, smoking, a bunch of other religious-specific accusations, catching me totally off guard. I would have to learn from a different friend that the teacher was his grandmother. Not the point, though. Now my 7-year-old mind has way more questions and seemingly less people to talk honestly with. I don't know if it was that night or shortly after, but before my 8th birthday and baptism, I would start to have recurring nightmares. Not in the traditional sense, for my dreams were of torture, blood, and death of others by my hand. I remember the first like it was literally last night. I'm standing in some random field with a gravel road and a hand-fashioned wooden fence running along its side. As I stand there waiting for something, I don't know what at the time, I see that teacher whistling and smiling, though at the time I had never seen her do either. I sprint from the barn's porch I didn't realize I was standing on and attack her from behind, knocking her unconscious to drag back inside. I know when she awakes because I see the world through her eyes. I stand before her, me, openly smiling, holding butcher's knives and upside down, she thinks, before realizing I have her strung by her feet over a vat of roiling oil. I utter no words or change my composure in any way as I move in. She pleads and cries, and I can see on my face real elation, true joy, happiness stronger than I had ever felt in real life at that point. I feel her heart accelerate in terror as she can almost feel my dreamt heart accelerate in excitement. I notice for the first time that I'm naked and fully erect, now becoming covered in blood as I try to flay her alive. Her screams and thrashings only seem to excite me further till finally she starts to sob, and I cut where I presume her vocal box is. To finish, I then begin dipping her repeatedly into the oil, igniting fresh but now gurgled endeavors at sound. Smiles and oil is all I can see till the end of the dream. The whole ordeal felt like a multitude of hours, if not days. I was 7, so of course all I had were horrific images that I couldn't even begin to describe in the previous manner, and made only worse as I had seemingly enjoyed the whole thing. I really wanted to talk to someone, or just explain it away as a nightmare. Disgusted as I was when I awoke from it that first time and all since, the emotions of disgust, terror even, stemmed from knowing I still partially felt that abundance of glee upon waking, that I could feel the emotions welling up every time I would dwell on those dreams and eventually those thoughts. I'm not really sure if open acknowledgement of this would have helped or hurt the decisions I would make later on in life, but the mere existence of those dreams definitely affected every decision I have ever made. My only hope, wish at the time, was that if I had followed all the rules, I wouldn't be the monster feared. Life's kind of funny. When you're 7, though, it can be tough with little context to make informed decisions. With the best logic I could muster, I chose to be baptized as a member of my mother's church, Restoration. They had 3 books, you see, which, in my mind at the time, meant more evidence and more knowledge. Also, I went to a restoration school, kids were assholes enough since we were poor and my father was different. Why make it worse? I also felt like my father would handle it better than my mother. Not sure if I was correct about that. Needless to say, life-altering events were beginning to escalate quickly, and while I would still idiotically open up honestly to my parents a time or two after that, my baptism would not be among them. I would lie for the second time, and again for religious inclusion. All I wanted was to fit in with a family I was becoming increasingly worried about being distant from. The pompous and fanfare surrounding my baptismal ceremony felt overwhelming. Extended family members and church friends lined the grass on a freezing, cloudy October day in Lamoni, Iowa, and after going under the water and saying the prayers, I would give testimony of how I could see a light and was filled with the warmth of the Spirit of God. Yeah, I imagine shock is pretty common when submerging yourself suddenly in 50-degree water, especially at 8 years of age. Oh, and the sun is fucking bright, even if behind a little cloud cover. I would move forward now with a goal, a purpose in mind. Now I felt I understood that devotion, dedication, study, and application were all I lacked. We're all sinners after all. I was just a bit off. Nothing that couldn't be muzzled because Christ died and rose again, and rainbows, daisies, and unicorns. Sorry. The point being, I began to actually listen to what my elders were attempting to teach. You see, between school, my own mentality, and home life, with 2 younger siblings as almost my only 2 friends, I had allowed myself to play with very dark actions culminating to and from my 8-year-old baptism. I couldn't begin to understand it at the time, but my little game of truth or dare at this point would be very delayed during times. And of course you can't play alone. It's almost enough for me to thank a God I don't believe in that I was caught quickly, else who knows what more damage I could have caused my sister, or maybe eventually my brother. This would inspire my parents to enlist my maternal grandmother to teach her class on sexuality. My poor cousins and eventually my school would get a taste in that misery. However, it wasn't all that bad. Since my grandmother's class was a weird version of abstinent only, it could have been far worse. I say weird version because it was highly detailed from a purely biological standpoint, while being paired with creationist overtones. I think this method really helped to achieve at least the outward appearance of what my parents wanted. The scientific bare-bones basics approach kept me attentive, while the religious aspects mixed in made the virtues seem more real, tangible in a sense. My point is that I began in earnest to try acting differently. It was slowly dawning on me that all those words of morality were descriptions of actions an individual had to actually perform, not just speak on. While still 8, our school began a sort of reward system in the elementary grades, the carrot part in the carrot stick system, and any time you would show kindness, intellect, devotion, or excellence, you could get this little card stamped by a staff member who had witnessed it. When the card was full, you would get something silly like a casual dress day or extra recess, etc. I rarely filled any of these, which of course I just love to blame on assholes kids getting awarded for inconsequential bullshit, but getting off topic again. It was one day in the latter half of second grade that the principal awarded everyone in my class a free, fully filled card for some holy reason I forget now, and I couldn't bring myself to accept it. I was way unworthy, and to accept it would be totally unjustified for me, if not just straight up unconscionable. While I doubt I wanted to, I eventually found myself in the principal's office trying to explain, without too much detail, While I doubt I wanted to, I eventually found myself in the principal's office trying to explain without too much detail why I couldn't take that card and its benefits. Like everything in my childhood, though, God was the answer. We prayed on it, and I faked like everything was hunky-dory, taking the card so I could get the fuck out of there. Then I just shoved that sick feeling right next to the pissed off one that wanted to scream bloody murder. So much for that route, because I would then get the joy of explaining that incident to my parents. They were very open to listening as to why I didn't think I should get the good boy card at school. I'm sure they were very curious as to what was going on in my head, and fucking good. I only recognize it as such now, years later, but I honestly believe that little episode of bullshit was when I started to see myself as two halves of a whole. Logic and control versus emotion, or as I see it, rage. By the time I reached 11, 12, I could see the strings of power and control woven about my life, even if I couldn't describe them. I would fuck up constantly in this period, as even such a small-scale social setting had all the similar school tropes, and I seemed incapable of navigating it. The nerds would suck up to the jocks, hoping to not get shit on as bad as the small group of complete dejects, and then me. 1 second cool as a cucumber, next I'm physically trying to attack somebody for some comment, not sticking up for a bullied classmate, snitching a classmate out for being a bully, making weird animal noises in the back of the class, mumbling and repeating myself in hushed tones, or just popping off with some really hateful shit. I would never be popular due to my standoffish nature. Even the few friends I did have, I would never fully I would never be popular due to my standoffish nature. Even the few friends I did have, I would never feel truly close to, even as I would fight the emotions of desperation to deepen these bonds, as they were my only link to some form of friendship. I would try to block all of it with devotion, study, and knowledge. I started reading the Bible more frequently, trying to comprehend the concepts my parents, teachers, and priesthood expounded on, till the next blow would land squarely on the foundations of what I believed in, and shake the hold I maintained over my unquenched rage. I was 13, or very close to turning said age, when the eldest maternal first cousin got the call. Restorationism is unique from Catholicism in that any male can be called to the priesthood, as well as they don't have to forsake family or future plans. They also would serve a function of the church depending on which office of priesthood they were called to. I was now irate. There was no fucking way my younger cousin was worthy of being a priesthood member at that time. I actually tried to be worthy. Paid attention in religion class. Didn't bully my weaker, smaller cousins. I didn't play video games. Hell, I damn near had the Bible memorized, and not just the verses damn near any atheist off the street could quote you. I know it sounds like I really deserved that call, huh? Like I really had the whole mindset of being a leader of faith on lock. No, my cousin did earn the position, worked to meet his position's standards, or at the very least, I instantly recognized the hypocrisy and envy that poisoned the previous thoughts trying to elevate my own worth. My cousin didn't have to be below me or for my actions to be recognized. Those acts just weren't, is how I felt. And I shoved all the malice right back where it belonged, telling myself that this whole event didn't change a thing. It did, though. The proof to me is I can hardly remember real details from this point to about 15. It's hard to get my head around, too, as these years had several impactful events. We would change private schools, and I would get a couple new friends there. I would get new friends at the neighborhood we would move to as a result of my dad landing a job with the power company. Finally, my family owned a house. We'd get a dog, satellite TV, reliable internet, hell, eventually even a GameCube. I discovered my passion for writing in this time with one of my most fondly remembered teachers. I avidly sought reading material for knowledge, and I became addicted to one of humanity's oldest hobbies through one of the few and earliest video games I got to play, Medieval Total War. It's amazing to me how I never joined the military, though every time I think it out, it gets pretty clear why. Regardless, while I view these times as almost robotic in the nature I lived those days out, it was still eventful. Life and its day-to-day shit kept going. Almost like how I felt in second grade when the towers fell and every human with a voice was showing signs of panic in whatever way befitted them. I had no context, no understanding, nothing to relate, and as such it was keep quiet and it'll pass, Chris. Life goes on for those who live. What occurs after belong only to those of the living, the ones who make the action, those who know of it, and the rest living with its fallout. If I know not, then learn. I'm distracted again. So this funk would cloud my mind for a while, during which my parents would loosen up the 50s era grip. Social media would begin to rear its ugly head with platforms like Zanga, MySpace, and eventually Facebook, and I would get to explore more video games with the job money I could start earning. Zanga was my first social media experience, and it went as well as you can imagine. Zanga was almost like a diary for me. You could post little blogs for people to read, and they could message you, as well as explore each other's pages where random internet bullshit could be attached. I had gotten maybe 2 weeks with the platform before I mysteriously had to explain my very private Zanga entries to my parents, who I had told nothing of the platform. If you have made it this far, then you know that those entries had a multitude of statements my parents were very curious about. Also, for all the hoity-toity putting knowledge on a pedestal they spouted constantly, it seemed they didn't really believe it for as long as I lived in their house. How else would they have been able to monitor me if I could just figure out a way to circumvent their gaze? Fuck if I can't keep on topic. Now I knew I couldn't do a damn thing online either. Same bullshit, different day in the life of Chris. But my life outlook would expand as I engaged in my first real relationship. Believe it or not, I met Elleraine on Hot or Not. And over the time we talked, I began to feel pretty confident this was a real human being and she was kind of into me. She lived over on the Kansas side, though, and I was still a few months away from my license. So we set up a double date, and I convinced a buddy who could drive to take us to the theater out there for a movie. I still have no idea to this day how my buddies my buddies and my parents discovered our treachery. But that spilled the beans about my new girlfriend. Surprising to me at the time, my parents had shifted enough to let me continue seeing her. I was elated for this was someone outside the circle of those I knew, or who they knew, and even better, she was incredible. She actually seemed to listen and care and support me for who I was, and also not try to alter my words to fit an agenda or push a personal belief on me. That's when I decided I didn't give two fucks how smart she was, or what people thought of how she dressed or acted. Elleraine was right. There was no God, and I went even further than her, as I saw no evidence for any spiritual higher being. Of course, love is a fickle thing, and I was a violently inclined rebellious teenager going into 16 plus. Elleraine couldn't stick around, and afterward, in the depths of a teenager's eternal misery, I would take another crack at opening up to my parents. This time, though, my intent was very much deceitful and malicious. I reiterate that I am not good with words, especially when I try to speak, so when conversations turn to a one-sided only my thought counts fest, I become frustrated with being unsure of how to progress, and usually just leave. In the cases outside of family, usually for good, because while I can't articulate my inquiries without being frustrated, which is on me, I don't forget that bullshit you pulled, and if you're not sorry, what is there to forgive? This time, I thought, we're putting a little test on the rents. A little science experiment to see if all those harsh judgments of what I saw them as were really warranted. It was after a particularly rough day at school where I was especially absorbed in all of the events I've written and then some, that I said fuck it. And when my dad came down to pretend to care about what was going on, I hit him with a 1-2 of I was sexually abused and I've rejected all religion up to and including the very concept of a God. They could not have realized just how easily they played into my hand and validated every nasty thought I had of them, even going beyond the extents that I had considered. LOL. Yet again. Laughing out loud. Yet again. First, Dad breaks down. Wrong play, old man. Crying in front of me. Bitch fucking please, how many times did men don't cry come out your fucking mouth? Would have helped the case if those crocodile tears hadn't cleared up in seconds when it was obviously having no effect. Second, you both thought spewing more God shit at me was going to somehow solve that shit right up. As if all the fucking hypocrisy I was being subjected to on the daily wasn't evidence enough that perhaps wrong route. Third, oh yeah, that's a smart move. Undermine your child's trust in you even further by gossiping about his issues behind his back to your precious faith leaders. What could possibly go wrong with that? Certainly not an entire sermon directly, indirectly aimed at him with no choice but to sit through it. Fourth, winner, winner, chicken dinner. Send the kid off to some Christian psychiatrist. I mean, you couldn't possibly find the time to put forth the effort to actually fix the fucked up problems you created. Just send him off to some random-ass dude to pluck his brain, all because he happens to have similar faith, and that profession is what the world offers you for dealing with a hellion. Obviously, this made my 16-year-old self elated. Angsty teenage me had all the proof he needed to stop giving even a quarter fuck, and seek out trouble how I could, where I could, when I could, so long as I was utterly confident it couldn't get back to my parents. Just as some quick examples, other than the vague got in some fights, dressed like Marilyn Manson, actually got to go to some parties and actually drink, I would also trash an innocent girl's heart for, to this day, can't explain any other way than for shits and fucking giggles, and I would get a peek at the real ugly self that actually scares me. There was a moment down in Texas visiting my father's side of the family that I will never forget or forgive. Of all the horrific things I do and don't discuss here, this event ranks with only two others on events I caused that truly haunt me in the present. We were at my eldest uncle's place, where I would go to a different room, not desiring to be with my overbearing religious family. Of course, my very young cousins wanted to play with their oldest cool cousin, and were jumping around making a ruckus while I insisted and pretended that I was trying to sleep. Then it got real. They had started to bounce and play around on top of me instead of just about me, and before I registered it, I was pitching a mighty obvious tent. Kids under 5 don't know what the hell is going on, really. Not because they're incapable, but generally because they haven't lived long enough to understand the context and details that surround every one of us. And one of the youngest cousins was just curious enough to stare at the same shame that had me locked in the frozen stasis that was the flurry of multiple emotions vying to be enacted. It seemed like the seconds became hours, as in horror and desire, I saw her reach out her tiny hand towards the obstruction. I snapped to attention and literally snapped around. Only then, of course, the call for dinner saving me. It didn't matter that technically nothing had occurred. The fact that I let it come that close, the sick feeling of joy I knew was there over what could happen, what was going to happen. The yearning coupled with terror of it actually happening. However, this behavior would continue till my father and I would literally come to blows over nonsense with threats of kicking me out aplenty. While my mother would cool things off, it was logic that I believed kept things there. I had recently tried cigarettes, and that first taste brought such peace and tranquility I had never experienced before. Dwelling on the parental incident in context with all other events leading to it, I recognized that I was moments away from being free of whatever rule of law my parents sucked at the teat of, and I just had to make it to college where their control and rule wouldn't apply any longer. So the last 8 months or thereabouts had me biting my tongue and biding my time. At first, it would be everything I had envisioned and more. Hell, it was because of that I would very quickly understand just how fucked over I was. Regardless, I picked up smoking like a fiend. I felt calm and in control for the first time, unclouded by the torrent of wrath I had done battle with daily. I realized I had never needed to get that emotional in the first place. Totally unnecessary, as with critical thought and careful consideration of speech, you could subvert arguments, expose manipulation, and most importantly, avoid pointless physical altercations. I started to understand why I didn't believe in a God instead of just blindly spouting it. By having little concept of why I rejected faith, any statement I would make around my family previously left me feeling just like their accusations, an angsty teen, saying shit for attention. I became engrossed in physical philosophy and theology, an easy step from my love of history. I would also find some of my closest friends to this day at that college. Despite all these revelations, I still knew what I was, still had all my dark fantasies and fucked up thoughts. Most relevant, I was still extremely opposed to any form of authority I could possibly perceive which would be my downfall on completing college. The memory burns like a hot poker even now. The nonchalant attitude my accounting teacher had while talking about how you used to just be able to pay to take the certified public accountant's test till recently awakened that old friend of mine. I was stunned, dwelling on it long after the class had ended. In other words, instead of spending fuck tons of money and time to get a piece of paper so then I could sit at this test in hopes to go do this job I was considering, I could have just read all related information needed, paid a little money for a certification test, and been about my life. Well, basically I would flunk out. I tried moving in with the rents and went to community college for another partial semester, but the damage was done. It was February of 2009 that I would be real with my parents for the final time. Not out of desire or deception, love or hate, but simply as fact. I was done with the way they had laid out for me. I was moving in with my new friends from the first college, Estros and Yalahila. Esteros and Yalohila. Esteros, Yalohila. To get jobs, to make ends meet, while we pursued our real dreams, the desires we had for the future of our lives. I would communicate with my parents, though, for a while longer as I tried to convince myself I didn't hate them, but the actions themselves. Speaking terms certainly changed when I probably did the worst thing in their eyes. Eventually, my roommates and I had to move back over Missouri side, which was closer to my job, when their employment fell through in Kansas. Here in some shitty little apartment I could barely afford off of $400 every 2 weeks, I would rekindle friendship with an old flame, Juliana, who was engaged at the time to what had been one of my best friends towards the end of high school. He had joined the military and was overseas, so she would come over and we would hang out while my roommates and I did our thing. Get stoned, play video games, watch TV and movies, write books and music, and in general, just whatever the fuck we pleased, so long as it wasn't trying to hurt or judge another in the house. One day, though, I hear from my sister of how my engaged best friend has been sending her messages of the unwanted variety. Time for a true colors appearance by yours truly, as I would seduce his fiancée, my own fucking friend. Yes, we had probably started to get too close in this time period, but when I was in full principled human being kick, I was worse than the most righteous of holy men about my actions, so nothing had, and I thought would, ever come of it. Never say never, kids, because it obviously doesn't take... Never say never, kids, because it obviously didn't take much to show I was just as hypocritical as any of those righteous, holy men. I do have a knack for reaping the consequences of what I sow. So it was not long after I had pulled my dumbass stunt that I found out how lucky I was to be a proud DNA donor. Oh, how the zealots of our families freaked. Not like I can talk shit, 'cause I freaked. I was making $400 every 2 weeks. I was the only source of income in the apartment at the time. I literally had been raised and or validated in no areas that would lead to a proper income to begin with, and I had no intention of subjecting myself to the desires, whims, and speculations of those who could provide that potential. Sure, I had been attracted to her, and we were, or had been, friends, and even further, we held very similar passions and mentalities. But I didn't love her. Not the way I felt a commitment of that magnitude required. Even worse in my mind, and certainly the most important, was how there was no way in fucking hell I was going to pass my shit on to a child. I recognized all the worst traits of my parents in myself. I was an open and vocal atheist in the heart of the Bible Belt. And of course, I was a monster. A socio or psychopathic killer, just one trigger event away from making my now waking nightmares a reality for everyone I could get my hands on. I wasn't going to do it, and would come close to getting that trigger event I seemed to almost seek through my life decisions. I remember my heart sinking in my chest as she called, everything having gone silent for approximately a month or so. So I damn near knew before having known it. I tried to reason with her, stating the case for how we weren't equipped or prepared to raise a separate and intelligent human life that would be totally dependent for at very minimum 8 years. She interrupted me about no abortions before I could spit out that abortion wasn't the only option. Other couples in better life situations could give the child loving parents and a legit home to grow up in. She wasn't having it, though, and good on her. She showed more courage, fortitude, and confidence than I certainly had, or perhaps ever will ever have. She would follow it up with compassion and integrity, as talking the talk just wasn't enough. No sarcasm there, people. Perhaps she just saw me for what I really am in our brief time together. But it doesn't matter what her intent was. Her actions were to leave me free to live how I saw fit, seeking no retribution or justice of any kind, to my knowledge. However, this stroke of mercy was just one avenue that the issue could apply pressure from, and the others were almost just as dreadful in my mind. My parents also somehow thought I had told Juliana to get an abortion, which I eventually stopped defending myself against, since, whatever, think of me what you want, as I really didn't have any strong feelings on abortions anyway, since I'm not a fucking woman. Such a fucking stupid simpleton argument to make in defense of women's rights, but I digress. My maternal and paternal grandparents both got shots in about my moral compass, ethical standing, hell, value as a human being. Nothing I didn't expect, though the 6-page letter I got from my maternal grandmother stung real good. I wish I had it so I could post it here, as it was one of the last real communications between us before she passed, and it destroyed all the notions of respect and love I had for her and tried to hold on to up to that point. Immediately, I set to writing my own lengthy letter to show her that two could play lofty word games when pondering another human being's mindset. By the time I finished the 10-plus page rebuke farewell letter, I was broken. Probably the first real, though still half-hearted attempt I would make on my life. I thought I was done, that I didn't care any longer, and that how many lives did I need to finger-fuck before I accepted that I was a blemish on the psychological health of those around me, same as I was to my very self. I tried using the old knife in the tub trick, though just like when I would cut as a teen, the blood just didn't seem to be flowing fast enough. As I got more desperate to lay my arm open, I heard the rustling of my roommates waking, and there was only one restroom in the apartment. I was ashamed to own up to that to them for a long time, but they knew. You don't just get some random long gash down the inside of one arm by tripping up the stairs. This is when, like the homicidal thoughts I waged war against with will and recognition, I decided to combat my suicidal inclinations with the very rage I had sought to subdue. Hatred. Stubbornness. I had told myself that others would not control me, that I would live free and not treat others in the manner I didn't like being treated, and I would do it my own way no matter the thoughts people had on my actions. Why was suicide any different? Just another asshole trying to convince me that I had to take this action for shit to get better. This way or the highway. Fuck that shit. Suicide was just another way of giving up, of bowing the knee. Not this motherfucker. Not until I had lost every ounce of will. Given up on every principle, self-shackled to my ideals. This is what I decided in that shitty, powerless, starving moment where hope was only there if you made it. I didn't pretend that I was going to be some great, outstanding bastion of human behavior, but maybe if I kept working, struggling, learning, just maybe, I could stop being the monster I was so sure I was. Well, there you go, folks. Prologue over. Sorry I drew it out so long, or in general, drug you through the shit. But hopefully I painted the proper picture of who I am. I just feel like I need you to understand the lens from which you should view me as I'm about to spew bullshit. I know you're probably hoping the end of this prologue would be the end of my erratic, if not insane, writing style, but this is probably going to read like a madman's ravings till the very end. If you continue reading, there are only 4, though broad, chapters or subjects that will, in a sense, provide the subject matter for that section, though they will all be tied in for the finale. We'll start with some world and then American history, the same order I came to love these subjects growing up. Afterwards, I'll broaden the net wider as we dive into the details of our institutions in all their variety, transitioning at that point to human beings in both a physical and emotional, or I guess metaphysical sense, before the final blow of the epilogue. This is gonna sound mean. Fuck it. For those in the societal conditions I most empathize with, please try to stick with this. I know I read like a right fucker, with my word choices and sentence structures, but assholes who love to surround themselves with words to beat us with need to be kept happy in some fashion. I've tried to put enough context into my sentences in belief it might get the basics across with, which is all you need. The shitty wording and long-winded blathering is for those who need it for some reason to stay engaged to the end. Undoubtedly, this of course will mean more opportunities to chop my writings into whatever anyone wants. But I hope you remember my first disclaimer towards the beginning. I do not think we should try to control each other. I don't think we have the capability of controlling the future. But I think we should never stop trying to control ourselves. No matter what words I throw on these pages, I am not intelligent, decent, or logical by any stretch of the imagination. So if you start to feel that my words are abrasive, disgusting, assaulting, hateful, I hope instead of venting action on I or perhaps others that this may remind you of, you would step away, shrugging this book and I off as the batshit crazy lies that we are. I have no other way of communicating to you, those who have strangely persevered to this point, about the issues I see and the opinions I have on them, except through this method. Words that are used to hate, lie, manipulate, bully, demean, dominate, destroy, demonize, demonstrate, uplift, encourage, inspire, teach, praise, love. I hope you're ready for this, because I'm still not sure I am. History. My fascination with world history stems from the combination of my love of reading, biblical upbringing, and the ease of access to that knowledge. For a long time, I would exclude American history from this, as not only did I find it boring, but I would be under the childishly naive and false belief that it was just us going about setting right all the incorrect or evil traditions our European, African, and Asian forefathers had subjugated us with for millennia. Funny how it was my love of war games that would help open my eyes to our own past and ignite my passion for learning it. I'm sure a few people would disagree at my earlier statement of war being one of man's oldest hobbies, but while no one I could easily find stated it first, I stand by that opinion. Look no further than the findings at Jebel Sahaba, Sudan, or Nataruk, Kenya, both dating 10,000 or more years, though experts seem torn as to how much a stretch it is calling this evidence of war. I don't need any more evidence than a mass grave, but perhaps quotes from renowned individuals carry some weight. The Epic of Gilgamesh, translated by Marine Gallery Kovacs. He who has seen everything, I will make known to the lands. I will teach about him who experienced all things, alike, supreme over other kings, lordly in appearance. He is the hero born of Uruk, the goring wild bull. He walks out in front, the leader, and walks at the rear, trusted by his companions. Mighty Net, protector of his people, raging flood wave who destroys even walls of stone. Offspring of Lugalbanda, Gilgamesh is strong to perfection. He walks around in the enclosure of Uruk. Like a wild bull, he makes himself mighty. Head raised. There is no rival who can raise his weapon against him. His fellows stand attentive to his, and the men of Uruk become anxious in. The inspired versions of the Holy Scriptures by Joseph Smith Jr. And so great was the faith of Enoch that he led the people of God and their enemies to come to battle against them. And he spake the word of the Lord, and the earth trembled, and the mountains fled, even according to his command. And the rivers of water were turned out of their course, and the roar of the lions was heard out of the wilderness. And all nations feared greatly, so powerful was the word of Enoch, and so great was the power of the language which God had given him. There also came up a land out of the depths of the sea, and so great was the fear of the enemies of God, that they fled and stood afar off, and went upon the land which came up out of the depths of the sea. And the giants of the land also stood afar off, and there went forth a curse upon all the people which fought against God. And from that time forth there were wars and bloodshed among them. But the Lord came and dwelt with his people, and they dwelt in righteousness. The Holy Bible, King James Version. Originally published 1611, London, England. And it came to pass, when men began to multiply on the face of the earth, and daughters were born unto them, that the sons of God saw the daughters of men that they were fair, and they took them wives of all which they chose. And the Lord said, My spirit shall not always strive with man, for that he also is flesh, yet his days shall be 120 years. There were giants in the earth in those days, and also after that, when the sons of God came unto the daughters of men, and they bare children to them. The same became mighty men, which were of old, men of renown. And God saw that the wickedness of man was great in the earth, and that every imagination of the thoughts of his heart was evil continually. And it repented the Lord that he had made man on the earth, and it grieved him at his heart. And the Lord said, I will destroy man whom I have created from the face of the earth, both man and beast, and the creeping thing, and the fowls of the air, for it repenteth me that I have made them. But Noah found grace in the eyes of the Lord. These are the generations of Noah. Noah was a just man, and perfect in his generations, and Noah walked with God. And Noah begat 3 sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth. The earth also was corrupt before God, and the earth was filled with violence. And God looked upon the earth, and behold, it was corrupt, for all flesh had corrupted his way upon the earth. And God said unto Noah, The end of all flesh is come before me, for the earth is filled with violence through them. And behold, I will destroy them with the earth. There is also the first actual instance of the word war being used in King James Version, Genesis 14. And it came to pass in the days of Amraphel, king of Shinar, Arioch, king of Elasar, Chedorlaomer, king of Elam, and Tidal, king of nations. That these made war with Bera, king of Sodom, and with Bersha, king of Gomorrah, Shinab, king of Admah, and Shemeber, king of Zeboim, and the king of Bela, which is Zor. All these were joined together in the vale of Siddim, which is the Salt Sea. 12 years the served Chedorlaomer, and in the 13th year they rebelled, and in the 14th year Chedorlaomer and the kings that were with him, and smote the Rephims in Ashtaroth, Karnaim, and the Zuzans in Ham, and the Emins in Shavah, Kirathim, and the Horites in their Mount Seir, unto El Paran, which is by the wilderness. And they returned and came to En-Mishpat, which is Kadesh, and smote all the country of the Amalekites, and also the Amorites, that dwelt in Hazazon Tamar. and smote all the country of the Amalekites, and also the Amorites that dwelt in Hazazon Tamar. And there went out the king of Sodom, and the king of Gomorrah, and the king of Admah, and the king of Zeboim, and the king of Bela, and they joined battle with them in the vale of Siddim, with Chedorlaomer king of Elam, and with Tidal king of nations, and Amraphel king of Shinar, and Arioch king of Elasar, 4 kings with 5. And the vale of Siddim was full of slime pits, and the kings of Sodom and Gomorrah fled, and fell there, and they that remained fled to the mountain. And they took all goods of Sodom and Gomorrah, and all their victuals, and went their way. And they took Lot, Abram's brother's son, who dwelt in Sodom, and his goods, and departed. The History of Herodotus, by Herodotus. This is the showing forth of inquiry of Herodotus of Halicarnassus, to the end that neither deeds of men may be forgotten by lapse of time, nor the works great and marvelous, which have been produced, some by Hellenists and some by barbarians, may lose their renown. And especially that the causes may be remembered for which these waged war with one another. 1. Those of the Persians who have knowledge of history declare that the Phoenicians first began the quarrel. These, they say, came from that which is called the Erythraean Sea to this of ours, and having settled in the land where they continue even now to dwell, set themselves forthwith to make long voyages by sea, and conveying merchandise to Egypt and of Assyria, they arrived at other places, and also at Argos. Now Argos was at that time the first of the states within the land which is now called Hellas. And on the 5th or 6th day after they had arrived, when their goods had been almost all sold, there came down to the sea a great company of women, and among them the daughter of the king. And her name, as the Hellenists also agree, was Io, the daughter of Inachos, buying of the wares that pleased them most, when of a sudden the Phoenicians, passing the word from one to another, made a rush upon them, and the greater part of the women escaped by flight, but Io and certain others were carried off. And this, they say, was the first beginning of wrongs. Then after this, they say, certain Hellenists put into the city of Tyre in Phoenicia, and carried off the king's daughter Europa. These would doubtless be Cretans, and so they were quits for the former injury. After this, however, the Hellenists, they say, were the authors of the second wrong, for they sailed into the Ai of Colchis, and to the river of Phasis, with a ship of war. And from thence, after they had done the other business for which they came, they carried off the king's daughter Nydia. And the king of Colchis sent a herald to the land of Hellas, and demanded satisfaction for the rape, and to have his daughter back. But they answered that, as the barbarians had given them no satisfaction for the rape of Io the Argive, so neither would they give satisfaction to the barbarians for this. In the next generation after this, they say, Alexander the son of Priam, having heard of these things, desired to get a wife for himself by violence from Hellas, being fully assured that he would not be compelled to give any satisfaction for this wrong, inasmuch as the Hellenists gave none for theirs. So he carried off Helen, and the Hellenists resolved to send messengers first and to demand her back with satisfaction for the rape. And when they put forth this demand, the others alleged to them the rape of Medea, saying that the Hellenists were now desiring satisfaction to be given to them by others, though they had given none themselves, nor had surrendered the person when demand was made. Up to this point, they say, nothing more happened than the carrying away of women on both sides. But after this, the Hellenists were greatly to blame, for they set the first example of war, making an expedition into Asia before the barbarians made any into Europe. Now they say that in their judgment, though it is an act of wrong to carry away a woman by force, it is a folly to set one's heart on taking vengeance for their rape. And the wise course is to pay no regard when they have been carried away. For it is evident that they would never be carried away if they were not themselves willing to go. And the Persians say that they, namely the people of Asia, when their women were carried away by force, had made it a matter of no account, but the Hellenists, on account of a woman of Lacedaemon, gathered together a great armament. The Iliad of Homer, by Homer. In olive's cloudy grain the handle made, distinct with studs, and brazen was the blade. This on the helm discharged a noble blow, the plume dropped, nodding to the plain below. Shorn from the crest, Atrides weighed his steel. Deep through his front the weighty falcon fell. The crashing bones gave its The crashing bones before its force gave way. In dust and blood the groaning hero lay, forged from their ghastly orbs, and spouting gore, the clotted eyeballs tumble on the shore. And fierce Atrides spurned him as he bled, tore off his arms, and loud exulting said, Thus, Trojans, thus at length be taught to fear, O race perfidious, who delight in war. Already noble deeds ye have performed. A princess raped transcends a navy stormed. In such bold feats your impious might approve, without the assistance or the fear of Jove. The violated rights, the ravished dame, our heroes slaughtered, and our ships on flame. Crimes heaped on crimes shall bend your glory down, and whelm in ruins yon flagitious town, and whelm in ruins yon flagitious, and whelm in ruins yon flagitious town. O thou great Father, Lord of earth and skies, above the thought of man, supremely wise. If from thy hand the fates of mortals flow, from whence this favor to an impious foe? A godless crew, abandoned and unjust, still breathing rapine, violence, and lust. The best of things beyond their measure cloy, sleep's balmy blessing, love's enduring joy. The feast, the dance, whatever mankind desire, even the sweet charms of sacred numbers tire. But Troy forever reaps a dire delight in thirst of slaughter and in lust of fight. That last part is what I have seen commonly misquoted as men grow tired of sleep, love, singing, and dancing sooner than war. That's a fuckload of quotation, I know, and my bad. There's a whole lot to unpack there, which I'm not getting to immediately. These quotes were to just provide a little bit of reference to call back to in later topics, as well as serving as a decent prop to pretend supports the completely opinionated statement of war or violence being with humanity, since historical evidence separates us from the other animals. Maybe I think further than that. Anyway, I promise most of the quotes from henceforth won't be quite as long, except those pertaining to texts considering Scripture by religions, any and all religions. I'm an atheist, but that doesn't mean I have to be an ass. My apologies in advance, as my mistakes will be made, and I hope you believe it's done out of ignorance. Not that that means I am owed mercy. Fucking shit, getting off topic. For those listening instead of reading, I debated hard over how to handle footnotes in bibliography. My ultimate decision was to just cite the source as I went, both written and aloud. I will throw definitions of words perhaps not common or easily discerned from context in parentheses after the word in question, which will be written on the video, and all definitions are provided by my edition of the shorter Oxford English Dictionary 5th edition, published by Oxford University Press in Oxford, New York in the year 2002. While it may make the audio sound even more monotonous, most secondary phrases already in parentheses will be written on the video to go with the audio, because in many instances I feel the interjections of those thoughts can be extremely distracting to making the sentence sound sensible. Kinda like what a whole bunch of commas do, which I've totally not been doing up to this point. I've posted a list of words from the start of this chapter I feel could fall under what I just mentioned. Without further ado, let us just proceed under the recognition of man's fascination of war or violence, at least dating back as far as the evidence of language. Not far from my own start. While the video game Medieval Total War let me recognize the characteristic, I was introduced far younger through games like chess, Risk, Chinese checkers, etc., and through books like obviously the Bible, which I quoted earlier, but also more fictional historical accounts like God King, a story in the days of King Hezekiah, and Hittite Warrior, both by Joanne Williamson, The Ides of April by Mary Ray, The Story of Rolf and the Viking Bow by Alan French, and The Son of Charlemagne by Barbara Willard, just to name a few that also fit the narrative. Medieval Total War would also teach the basics of what even made the grand style of war I fantasized about even possible. Agriculture, infrastructure, overall the economic stability to provide the needs of a large group who, instead of participating in the aforementioned subjects, are focused on the fucking off. Training of skills and ability to enact those skills out on the enemy, I mean. Of course, I'm leaving out the populist dictator, king, president, leader that is needed to blind unite said large group to the desired purpose without certain questions about the details of accomplishing it. The fundamental travel between points A to B, broken down literally step by step. Now I'm getting ahead of myself. While I strongly believe violence, war, isn't unique to humans and has been a part of life since conception, we're focusing on human beings and also on some shared history, not war, and how as soon as we invented anything, it was seemingly the next thought, how can I use this to beat them so I can have their stuff, persons around them, labor, or just them? We can sugarcoat it with whatever fancy phrases, noble justifications, or moral ethical principles we like. Neither does it change what occurs in the moment, nor the actions that result from such confrontations. Fuck. Now, obviously, if early humans had to focus on feeding themselves at any given point, they were not defending, seeking shelter, or clean water. I can imagine time for frivolity's hobbies would be slim. However, get you a long pointy stick and small, slow-moving animals aren't the only supplement to safe berries and flora. Hell, a sharp rock does wonders to separate fur from meat, making better clothes, tools, or shelter. And no matter how strong, intelligent, or experienced you are, how much easier is any task if done with dedicated others of comparable attributes? Then again, what happens when you've hunted the last of the game, foraged the final herbs of the season? Human beings had to find other means of being self-sustaining. I'll just give you the entry collegiate to level text version. For this next quote, I change up the traditional format of citing and break the earlier promise about quotation that probably won't be upheld at all. The book uses a lot of pictures and places to give visual examples that I will not be providing. After I state the book, nothing will be in quotations, even though much of what is written comes directly from the source material. The text, while still a summary, is quite long-winded, as writers tend to be. I mentioned the issue of visual aids, but how the chapters are divided as well made me pause on how to quickly cover this early intro. Instead, where you see quotations is my phrasing in an attempt to smooth out one of the aforementioned problems. And I feel too drastic of a change to be left misquoted, but too jarring to read without the alteration. Also, this is going to be the only reference material for catching us up on prehistoric man. I don't think my summary will include any statements too radical or still hotly debated, but whatever. Encounters in World History, Sources and Themes from the Global Past, Volume 1 to 1500 CE. First edition by Thomas Sanders, Samuel H. Nelson, Stephen Murillo, Nancy Ellenberger. This first chapter provides an introduction to the problems of evidence and interpretation through an examination of early human history. Because there are no written sources for most of this period, it is sometimes referred to as prehistory, on the assumption that history emerges with writing. This age of early human history is roughly dated to begin about 6 million years ago in Africa. According to generic evidence, that was when humans and chimpanzees, our closest living relatives, diverged evolutionarily. The family tree of early hominids is complicated and subject to continual debate and revision by paleoanthropologists. But the broad outlines are agreed upon, so its details need not concern us here. Enclosed in the pages are photos of humanoid skulls associated with upcoming human species mentioned. Already marked by the binocular vision and opposable thumbs common to apes, ancestral hominids developed bipedalism of before 4 million years ago. By perhaps 2.5 million years ago, the early human species, Homo habilis, probably ancestral to modern humans, had learned to fashion and use simple tools. By roughly 1.9 million years ago, early humans of the species Homo ergaster, whose brains were about 3/4 the size of those of modern humans, were not only making stone tools but had mastered the use of fire. 1.75 million years ago. The variant of Homo erectus, slightly more similar to modern humans, stayed in Africa and invented a significant advance in the production of chipped stone tools known as Acheulean technology. Homo erectus, a branch of these early humans, became the first of hominids to move out of Africa, occupying the temperate and tropical zones of Asia starting around 1 million years ago. 1.75 million years ago, Homo erectus is the branch of Homo ergaster that left Africa, with a brain about 2/3 the size of modern humans. Homo erectus used a somewhat more complex set of stone tools than earlier species and mastered the use of fire. Then, about 200,000 years ago, a separate group descended from Homo ergaster emerged in East Africa as the modern human species, Homo sapiens. The evidence for this date comes from both generic and comparative linguistics. The first Homo sapien fossils date only to 130,000 years ago. The oldest Homo sapiens fossils outside of Africa were found in Southwest Asia and date to 90,000 years ago. Almost as early as the evidence of not only new sorts of tools, but also the first new products that could have artistic or ritual significance. Certainly by the period starting 40,000 years ago, with some hints dating well before that, there was an explosion of technology and art, as well as a tremendous expansion of the geographic range of Homo sapiens into areas never colonized by Homo erectus, including subarctic and Arctic climates, and land masses such as Australia. By 14,000 years ago, humans occupied all the major continents except Antarctica. We see a few photos of examples of simple tools that are dated to correspond with the humanoid skulls previously mentioned. This is used to support the book's correlation with the increase in skull dimensions, what the book refers to as the human toolkit, to the advancement of tools, even if these simple improvements seem almost negligible. So, starting at least 70,000 years ago, and certainly only in association with fossils of anatomically modern humans, Homo sapiens, the human toolkit, changes. The changes are particularly dramatic after 40,000 years ago in Europe, the beginning of what paleontologists call the Upper Paleolithic period, which coincides with the arrival of Homo sapiens in Europe at the ultimate expense of Neanderthals. Up to this point, all humans had lived by hunting and gathering. By 10,000 years ago, agriculture had appeared in a few areas. Domestication of plants and animals would be repeated independently several times and spread from those various points of origin. Agriculture made possible permanent settlements, more complex societies, and the whole range of activities, inventions, and cultures. More photographic examples of increasingly complex arrowheads, fishing spears, cave art, ornate carvings, the semi-famous Venus statuette, and a Russian hut made of mammoth bones roughly dated 20,000 years ago. These are used to lead into the progression of humans from nomadic tribes to settled cities, nations. This leads to the first site mentioned, Çatalhöyük, on the Anatolian plateau in modern Turkey. The people of this settlement apparently made the transition to agriculture as long ago as 6500 BCE, taking advantage of the wild, large-seeded cereals, ancestors of domesticated wheat, that grew abundantly in the area. Çatalhöyük also contains artwork, shrines dedicated to a religion that apparently focused on hunting, and evidence of such typically urban concerns as garbage disposal. One of the pieces of speculation presented in the preceding description of Çatalhöyük is the potential usefulness of its unified exterior walls for defense. They may have served this purpose, but there is no clear evidence of warfare or its associated technologies at this site. In fact, there is no undisputed evidence for warfare defined as large-scale and organized killings of humans by other humans in any of the evidence uncovered by archaeologists for human societies before about 8,000 years ago. That is, well after the beginnings of agriculture. And that's that for the sort of modern outlook. Yep, got my fixation for war in there too, and abruptly stopped quotation. But I mean, what kind of nonsense is that definition? Even adhering strictly to that, I guess the Neanderthals just decided to wipe themselves out with no particular intention here and there. Yeah, I can see humans not helping themselves in that regard. Fuck it. I need to get away from this topic because, as you can see, I'm totally over the obsession from my earlier days. Of course, it took the more naive form of medieval history and fantasy. While I couldn't quote you the names of leaders, artisans, philosophers of the time period, I did know a few generals and quite a few more battle locations, strategies, and other details. I loved researching the different weapons and armor and the various uses they served in defeating the other opponent in a combination of wit and strength. Fantasy then provided the outlet for putting all these grand imaginings to coherent enjoyment in the oldest thrill, the conquering of evil by good. Such stupid, silly tropes that still pull the heartstrings when just enough suspension of disbelief can be acquired. It's definitely become harder recently to find that. This damn thing I'm writing now consumes every thought, it seems. Regardless, my only point here was to show agriculture wasn't necessarily the only achievement of note because of what had to come alongside it. Infrastructure. Gotta have a place to stay when farming the fields, and the settlement example shown in the book's pictures is a long way from a 20,000-year-old mammoth hut. Cities would not be the only great innovation, however. Just look at how far we had to take building shit over just less than 10,000 years of evidence that still remains. There is the pyramids of Djoser, or at Giza, the White Temple of Uruk, Etymonki Ziggurat, the Temple of Artemis, the Lighthouse of Alexandria, so on and so forth. You know, I fully expected not a single mention of the architects of these structures, but not only was I pleasantly surprised, but also completely justified in my expectations. Oh, 4 of the 6 mentioned have credits to somebody other than a deity leader. We got a couple Egyptian nobles and a very modestly accredited Greeks as just architects, which I'm sure we'd find to be the case if we could all see for ourselves. Totally not just early evidence of an asshole wanting everyone to believe. I'm getting antagonistic now, assuming a bunch of shit. It's hard not to, though. Do you think automatically of the names of the people who built, with their physically attached hands, structures like the Colosseum, Taj Mahal, Eiffel Tower, Big Ben, the Winter Palace, hell, the church you might attend, or store you shop at? I know I don't. I'm shit awful with names, and I don't even know half the names of the leaders of the times involving the feats I just mentioned so flippantly. On top of that, what about the steps it takes to actually put thought in action in the form of construction, multiplied by all the hands that have to bring it to a successful conclusion? We didn't just build a steppe temple in Egypt one day, then say, yup, onto the mausoleum at Halicarnassus. Though I mean in a grand sense of things, it can certainly come off that way at times, playing pretend at intelligence doing this scatterbrained research. Boy, we'll just go back to basics with some brief highlights of some maybe important, maybe overlooked details of agriculture and infrastructure. The Code of Hammurabi, translated by L.W. King. When Anu the Sublime, king of the Anunnaki, and Bel, the Lord of heaven and earth, who decreed the fate of the land, assigned to Marduk, the overruling son of E, God of righteousness, dominion over earthly man, and made him great among the Igigi. They called Babylon by his illustrious name, made it great on earth, and founding an everlasting kingdom in it, whose foundations are laid so solidly as those of heaven and earth. Then Anu and Bel called by name me, Hammurabi, the exalted prince, who feared God, to bring about the rule of righteousness in the land, to destroy the wicked and the evildoers, so that the strong should not harm the weak, so that I should rule over the black-headed people like Shamash, and enlighten the land to further the well-being of mankind. If anyone ensnare another, putting a ban upon him, but he cannot prove it, then he that ensnared him shall be put to death. If anyone bring an accusation against a man, and the accused go to the river and leap into the river, if he sink in the river, his accuser shall take possession of his house. But if the river prove that the accused is not guilty, and he escape unhurt, then he who had brought the accusation shall be put to death, while he who leaped into the river shall take possession of the house that had belonged to his accuser. If a judge try a case, reach a decision, and present his judgment in writing, if later error shall appear in his decision, and it be through his own fault, then he shall pay 12 times the fine set by him in the case, and he shall be publicly removed from the judge's bench, and never again shall he sit there to render judgment. If anyone steal the property of a temple or of the court, he shall be put to death, and also the one who receives the stolen thing from him shall be put to death. If anyone buy from the son or the slave of another man without witness or contract, silver or gold, a male or female slave, an ox or a sheep, an ass or anything, or if he take it in charge, he is considered a thief, and shall be put to death. If anyone steal cattle or sheep, or an ass, or a pig, or a goat, if it belong to a god or to the court, the thief shall pay 30-fold therefor. If they belong to a freed man of the king, he shall pay 10-fold. If the thief has nothing with which to pay, he shall be put to death. If anyone steal the minor son of another, he shall be put to death. If anyone take a male or female slave of the court, or a male or female slave of a freedman outside the city gates, he shall be put to death. If anyone receive into his house a runaway male or female slave of the court, or of a freedman, and does not bring it out to the proclamation of the major domus, the master of the house shall be put to death. If anyone find a runaway male or female slaves in the open country and bring them to their masters, the master of the slaves shall pay him 2 shekels of silver. If anyone break a hole into a house, he shall be put to death before the hole and be buried. If anyone is committing a robbery and is caught, then he shall be put to death. If a chieftain or a man leave his house, garden, and field, and hires it out, and someone else takes possession of this house, garden, and field, and uses it for 3 years, if the first owner return and claims his house, garden, and field, it shall not be given to him. But he who has taken possession of it and used it shall continue to use it. If he hire it out for 1 year and then return, the house, garden, and field shall be given back to him, and he shall take it over again. If a chieftain or a man is captured on the way of the king, and a merchant buy him free, and bring him back to his place, if he have the means in his house to buy his freedom, he shall buy himself free. If he have nothing in his house with which to buy himself free, he shall be bought free by the temple of his community. If there be nothing in the temple with which to buy him free, the court shall buy his freedom. His field, garden, and house shall not be given for the purchase of his freedom. If a enter himself as withdrawn from the way of the king, and send a mercenary as substitute, but withdraw him, then the shall be put to death. If anyone take over a field to till it, and obtain no harvest therefrom, it must be proved that he did no work on the field, and he must deliver grain, just as his neighbor raised, to the owner of the field. If he do not till the field, but let it lie fallow, he shall give grain like his neighbors to the owner of the field, and the field which he let lie fallow he must plow and sow and return to its owner. If anyone take over a waste-lying field to make it arable, but is lazy, and does not make it arable, he shall plow the fallow field in the 4th year, harrow it, and till it, and give it back to its owner, and for each 10 gan, 10 gur of grain shall be paid. If a man rent his field for tillage for a fixed rental, and receive the rent of his field, but bad weather come and destroy the harvest, the injury falls upon the tiller of the soil. If he do not receive a fixed rental for his field, but lets it on half or 1/3 shares of the harvest, the grain on the field shall be divided proportionally between the tiller and the owner. If the tiller, because he did not succeed in the 1st year, has had the soil tilled by others, the owner may raise no objection. The field has been cultivated, and he receives the harvest according to agreement. If anyone owe a debt for a loan, and a storm prostrates the grain, or the harvest fail, or the grain does not grow for lack of water, in that year he need not give his creditor any grain. He washes his debt tablet in water and pays no rent for this year. If a merchant give an agent corn, wool, oil, or any other goods to transport, the agent shall give a receipt for the amount, and compensate the merchant therefor. Then he shall obtain a receipt from the merchant for the money that he gives the merchant. If the agent is careless and does not take a receipt for the money which he gave the merchant, he cannot consider the unreceipted money as his own. If the agent accept money from the merchant, but have a quarrel with the merchant, then shall the merchant swear before God and witnesses that he has given this money to the agent, and the agent shall pay him 3 times the sum. If the merchant cheat the agent, in that as the latter has returned to him all that had been given him, but the merchant denies the receipt of what had been returned to him, then shall this agent convict the merchant before God and the judges, and if he still deny receiving what the agent had given him, shall pay 6 times the sum to the agent. If a tavern keeper does not accept corn according to gross weight in payment of drink, but takes money, and the price of the drink is less than that of the corn, she shall be convicted and thrown into the water. If conspirators meet in the house of a tavern keeper, and these conspirators are not captured and delivered to the court, the tavern keeper shall be put to death. If a sister of God open a tavern, or enter a tavern to drink, then shall this woman be burned to death. If an innkeeper furnish 60 ka of usakanai drink she shall receive 50 ka of corn at the harvest. If anyone have a claim for corn or money upon another and imprison him, if the prisoner die in prison a natural death, the case shall go no further. If the prisoner die in prison from blows or maltreatment, the master of the prisoner shall convict the merchant before the judge. If he was free-born man, the son of the merchant shall be put to death. If it was a slave, he shall pay 1/3 of a mina of gold, and all that the master of the prisoner gave he shall forfeit. If anyone fail to meet a claim for debt and sell himself, his wife, his son, and daughter for money, or give them away to forced labor, they shall work for 3 years in the house of the man who bought them, or the proprietor, and in the 4th year they shall be set free. If he give a male or female slave away for forced labor, and the merchant sublease them or sell them for money, no objection can be raised. If anyone point the finger at a sister of a god or the wife of anyone, and cannot prove it, this man shall be taken before the judges, and his brow shall be marked. If a man take a woman to wife, but have no intercourse with her, this woman is no wife to him. If a man's wife be surprised with another man, both shall be tied and thrown into the water. But the husband may pardon his wife, and the king his slaves. If a man violate the wife of another man who has never known a man, and still lives in her father's house, and sleep with her, and be surprised, this man shall be put to death, but the wife is blameless. If a man bring a charge against one's wife, but she is not surprised with another man, she must take an oath, and then may return to her house. If the finger is pointed at a man's wife, but another man, but she is not caught sleeping with the other man, she shall jump into the river for her husband. If a man is taken prisoner in war, and there is a sustenance in his house, but his wife leave house and court, and go to another house, because this wife did not keep her court, and went to another house, she shall be judicially condemned, and thrown into the water. If anyone be captured in war, and there is not sustenance in his house, if then his wife go to another house, this woman shall be held blameless. If a man's wife who lives in his house wishes to leave it, plunges into debt, tries to ruin her house, neglects her husband, and is judicially convicted, if her husband offer her release, she may go on her way, and he gives her nothing as a gift of release. If her husband does not wish to release her, and if he take another wife, she shall remain as servant in her husband's house. If a woman quarrel with her husband and say, "You are not congenial to me," the reasons for her prejudice must be presented. If she is guiltless, and there is no fault on her part, but he leaves and neglects her, then no guilt attaches to this woman, she shall take her dowry and go back to her father's house. If she is not innocent, but leaves her husband, and ruins her house, neglecting her husband, this woman shall be cast into the water. If a man take a wife, and this woman give her husband a maidservant, and she bear him children, but this man wishes to take another wife, this shall not be permitted to him. He shall not take a second wife. If a man take a wife, and she bear him no children, and he intend to take another wife, if he take this second wife, and bring her into the house, this second wife shall not be allowed equality with his wife. If a man take a wife, and she give this man a maidservant as wife, and she bear him children, and then this maid assume equality with the wife, because she has borne him children, her master shall not sell her for money, but he may keep her as a slave, reckoning her among the maidservants. If she have not borne him children, then her mistress may sell her for money. If a man take a wife, and she be seized by disease, if he then desire to take a second wife, he shall not put away his wife, who has been attacked by disease, but he shall keep her in the house which he has built, and support her so long as she lives. If the wife of one man on account of another man has their mates murdered, both of them shall be impaled. If a man be guilty of incest with his daughter, he shall be given from the place. If a man be guilty of incest with his daughter, he shall be driven from the place. If a man betroth a girl to his son, and his son have intercourse with her, but he afterward defile her, and be surprised, then he shall be bound and cast into the water. If a man betroth a girl to his son, but his son has not known her, and if then he defile her, he shall pay her half a gold mina, and compensate her for all that she brought out of her father's house. She may marry the man of her heart. If anyone be guilty of incest with his mother after his father, both shall be burned. If anyone be surprised after his father with his chief wife, who has borne children, he shall be driven out of his father's house. If a state slave or the slave of a freed man marry the daughter of a free man, and children are born, the master of the slave shall have no right to enslave the children of the free. If a son of a paramour or a prostitute say to his adoptive father or mother, "You are not my father or my mother," his tongue shall be cut off. If the son of a paramour or a prostitute desire his father's house, and desert his adoptive father and adoptive mother, and goes to his father's house, then shall his eye be put out. If a man give his child to a nurse, and the child die in her hands, but the nurse, unbeknown to the father and mother, nurse another child, then they shall convict her of having nursed another child without the knowledge of the father and mother, and her breast shall be cut off. If a son strike his father, his hand shall be hewn off. If a man put out the eye of another man, his eye shall be put out. If he break another man's bone, his bone shall be broken. If he put out the eye of a freedman, or break the bone of a freedman, he shall pay 1 gold mina. If he put out the eye of a man's slave, or break the bone of a man's slave, he shall pay 1/2 of its value. If a man knock out the teeth of his equal, his teeth shall be knocked out. If he knock out the teeth of a freedman, he shall pay 1/3 of a gold mina. If anyone strike the body of a man higher in rank than he shall receive 60 blows with an ox whip in public. If a freeborn man strike the body of another freeborn man, or equal rank, he shall pay 1 gold mina. If a freed man strike the body of another freed man, he shall pay 10 shekels in money. If the slave of a freed man strike the body of a freed man, his ears shall be cut off. If during a quarrel one man strike another and wound him, then he shall swear, I did not injure him wittingly, and pay the physicians. If the man die of his wound, he shall swear similarly, and if he was a freeborn man, he shall pay half a mina in money. If he was a freed man, he shall pay 1/3 of a mina. If a man strike a freeborn woman so that she lose her unborn child, he shall pay 10 shekels for her loss. If the woman die, his daughter shall be put to death. If a woman of the free class lose her child by a blow, he shall pay 5 shekels in money. If this woman die, he shall pay half a mina. If he strike the maidservant of a man, and she lose her child, he shall pay 2 shekels in money. If this maidservant die, he shall pay 1/3 of a mina. If a physician make a large incision with an operating knife and cure it, if he open a tumor with an operating knife and saves the eye, he shall receive 10 shekels in money. If the patient be a freed man, he receives 5 shekels. If he be the slave of someone, his owner shall give the physician 2 shekels. If a physician make a large incision with the operating knife and kill him, or open a tumor with the operating knife and cut out the eye, his hand shall be cut off. If a physician make a large incision in the slave of a freed man and kill him, he shall replace the slave with another slave. If a slave say to his master, You are not my master, if they convict him, his master shall cut off his ear. Traditions and Encounters, A Brief Global History, Volume 1, From the Beginning to 1500 CE, by Jerry H. Bentley, Herbert F. Ziegler, Heather E. Streets. The origins of classical Persian society trace back to the stages of Mesopotamian society. When the Assyrian and Babylonian empires weakened in the 6th century BCE, the Medes and the Persians launched their first bid for the empire in the person of Cyrus the Achaemenid. Cyrus the Achaemenid. Cyrus proved to be a tough, wily leader and an outstanding military strategist, whose conquests laid the foundation for the First Persian Empire. Cyrus' empire survived and expanded during the reigns of his successors. His son, Cambyses, conquered Egypt in 1525 BCE. His younger kinsman, Darius, then extended the empire both east and west. Yet Darius was more important as an administrator than as a conqueror. Soon after his rise to power, Darius began to centralize his administration. About 520 BCE, he started to build a new capital of astonishing magnificence at Persepolis. Darius intended Persepolis to serve not only as an administrative center, but also as a monument to the Achaemenid dynasty. From the time of Darius to the end of the Achaemenid dynasty in 330 BCE, Persepolis served as the nerve center of the Persian Empire. A resplendent capital built bustling with advisors, ministers, diplomats, scribes, accountants, translators, and bureaucratic officers of all descriptions. Even today, massive columns and other ruins bespeak the grandeur of Darius's capital. The government of the Achaemenid Empire depended on a finely tuned balance between central initiative and local administration. Like their Mesopotamian predecessors, the Achaemenids appointed governors to serve as agents of the central administration and oversee affairs in the various regions. Darius divided his realm into 23 administrative and taxation districts he called satrapies. With each governed by an official satrap. Yet the Achaemenids did not try to push direct rule on their subjects. Although most satraps were Persian, the Achaemenids recruited local officials to fill almost all other administrative posts. The Achaemenid rulers employed two strategies to discourage distant satraps from allying with local groups or trying to become independent of Achaemenid authority. First, each satrapy had a contingent of military officers and tax collectors who served as checks on the satrap's power and independence. Second, the rulers created a new category of officials, essentially imperial spies, known as the eyes and ears of the king. These agents traveled throughout the empire with their own military forces, conducting surprise audits of accounts and procedures in the provinces and collecting intelligence reports. Taken together, these two strategies helped prevent the vast Achaemenid Empire from splitting into a series of independent kingdoms. Darius also sought to improve administrative efficiency by regularizing tax levies and standardizing laws. Instead of exacting irregular tribute payments from subject lands, as his predecessors had done, Darius instituted regular, formal tax levies. Each satrapy was now required to pay a set quantity of silver to the imperial court every year. To simplify the process, Darius issued standardized coins, a move that also fostered trade throughout his empire. Equally important, beginning in 520 BCE, Darius also sought to bring the many legal systems of his empire closer to a single standard. The point was not to abolish the existing laws of individual lands or peoples to impose a uniform law code on his entire empire. Rather, Darius wished to codify the laws of his subject peoples, modifying them when necessary to harmonize them with the legal principles observed in the empire as a whole. Alongside administrative and legal policies, the Achaemenid rulers took other measures to knit their far-flung realm into a coherent whole. They built good roads across their realm, notably the so-called Persian Royal Road, which stretched some 2,575 kilometers. The imperial government also organized a courier service and built 111 postal stations at intervals of 40 to 50 kilometers along the Royal Road. Each station kept a supply of fresh horses, enabling couriers to speed from one end of the Royal Road to the other in a week's time. The History of Rome, Volumes 1 through 5, by Theodore Mommsen. Book 1, The Period Interior of the Abolition of the Monarchy. Chapter 2, The Earliest Migrations into Italy. While it is probable that the Indo-Germans led a pastoral life and were acquainted with the cereals, if at all, only in their wild state, all indications point to the conclusion that the Greco-Italians were a grain-cultivating, perhaps even a vine-cultivating people. The evidence of this is not simply the knowledge of agriculture itself common to both, for this does not, upon the whole, warrant the inference of community of origin in the peoples who may exhibit it. An historical connection between the Indo-Germanic agriculture and that of the Chinese, Armenian, Aramaean, and Egyptian stocks can hardly be disputed, and yet these stocks are either alien to the Indo-Germans, or at any rate became separated from them at a time when agriculture was certainly still unknown. The truth is that the more advanced races in ancient times were, as at the present day, constantly exchanging the implements and the plants employed in cultivation. And when the annals of China refer the origin of Chinese agriculture to the introduction of 5 species of grain that took place under a particular king in a particular year, the story undoubtedly depicts correctly, at least in a general way, the relations subsisting in the earliest epochs of civilization. A common knowledge of agriculture, like a common knowledge of the alphabet, of war chariots, of purple, and other implements and ornaments, far more frequently warrants the inference of an ancient intercourse between nations than of their original unity. But as regards the Greeks and Italians, whose mutual relations are comparatively well known, the hypothesis that agriculture as well as writing and coinage first came to Italy by means of the Hellenists may be characterized as wholly inadmissible. On the other hand, the existence of a most intimate connection between the agriculture of the one country and that of the other is attested by their possessing in common all the oldest expressions relating to it. It would thus appear that the transition from pastoral life to agriculture, or to speak more correctly, the combination of agriculture with the earlier pastoral economy, must have taken place after the Indians had departed from the common cradle of the nations, but before the Hellenists and the Italians dissolved their ancient communion. Moreover, at the time when agriculture originated, the Hellenists and Italians appear to have been united as one nation, as one national whole, not merely with each other, but with other members of the great family. At least it is a fact that most important of these terms of cultivation, while they are foreign to the Asiatic members of the Indo-Germanic family, are used by the Romans and Greeks in common with the Celtic as well as the Germanic, Slavonic, and Lithuanian stocks. The distinction between the common inheritance of the nations and their own subsequent acquisitions in manners and in language is still far from having been wrought out in all the variety of its details and gradations. But there can be no doubt that, with the Greco-Italians, as with all other nations, agriculture became, and in the mind of the people remained, the germ and core of their national and of their private life. The house and the fixed hearth, which the husbandman constructs instead of the light hut and shifting fireplace of the shepherd, are represented in the spiritual domain and idolized in the goddess Vesta, almost the only divinity not Indo-Germanic, yet from the first common to both nations. One of the oldest legends of the Italian stock ascribes to King Italus, or as the Italians must have pronounced the word Vitalis or Vitulis, the introduction of the change from a pastoral to an agricultural life, and shrewdly connects with it the original Italian legislation. We have simply another version of the same belief in the legend of the Samnite stock, which makes the ox the leader of their primitive colonies, and in the oldest Latin national names, which designate the people as reapers or as field laborer. It is one of the characteristic incongruities which attach to the so-called legend of the origin of Rome, that it represents a pastoral and hunting people as founding a city. Legend and faith, laws and manners, among the Italians as among the Hellenists, are throughout associated with agriculture. Cultivation of the soil cannot be conceived without some measurement of it, however rude. Accordingly, the measures of surface and the mode of setting off boundaries rest, like agriculture itself, on a like basis among both peoples. The Oscan and Umbrian of 100 square feet responds exactly with the Greek. The principle of marking off boundaries was also the same. The land measurer adjusted his position with reference to one of the cardinal points, and proceeded to draw in the first place 2 lines, one from north to south and another from east to west, his station being at their point of intersection. Then he drew at certain fixed distances lines parallel to these, and by this process produced a series of rectangular pieces of ground, the corners of which were marked by boundary posts. This mode of defining boundaries, which is probably also Etruscan, but is hardly of Etruscan origin, we find among the Romans, Umbrians, Samnites, and also in very ancient records of the Tarentine Heracleots, who are as little likely to have borrowed it from the Italians as the Italians from the Tarentines. It is an ancient possession common to all. A particular characteristic of the Romans, on the other hand, was their rigid carrying out of the principle of the square, even where the sea or river formed a natural boundary. They did not accept it, but wound up their allocation of the land with the last complete square. It has been already observed that the transition from a pastoral to an agricultural economy preceded the immigration of the Italians into the peninsula. Agriculture continued to be the main support of all the communities in Italy, of the Sabellians and Etruscans, no less than of the Latins. In the case of Rome in particular, and it is only in its case that we can speak of agrarian relations with any sort of certainty. The Servian reform shows very clearly not only that the agricultural class originally preponderated in the state, but also an effort was made permanently to maintain the collective body of freeholders as the pith and marrow of the community. When in the course of time a large portion of the landed property in Rome had passed into the hands of non-burgesses, and thus the rights and duties of the burgess were no longer bound up with freehold property, the reformed constitution obviated this incongruous state of things and the perils which it threatened, not merely temporarily, but permanently, by treating the members of the community without reference to their political position, once for all according to their freeholding, and imposing the common burden of war service on the freeholders. A step which in the natural course of things could not but be followed by the concession of public rights. The whole policy of Roman war and conquest rested, like the Constitution itself, on the basis of the freehold system. As the freeholder alone was of value in the state, the aim of war was to increase the number of its freehold members. The vanquished community was either compelled to merge entirely into the yeomanry of Rome, or, if not reduced to this extremity, it was required not to pay a war contribution or a fixed tribute, but to cede a portion, usually a third part, of its domain, which was thereupon regularly occupied by Roman farms. Many nations have gained victories and made conquests as the Romans did, but none has equaled the Roman in thus making the ground he had won his own by the sweat of his brow, and in securing by the plowshare what had been gained by the lance. That which is gained by war must be wrestled from the grasp by war again, but it is not so with the conquest made by the plow. While the Romans lost many battles, they scarcely ever on making peace ceded Roman soil, and for this result they were indebted to the tenacity with which the farmers clung to their fields and homesteads. The strength of man and of the state lies in their dominion over the soil. The greatness of Rome was built on the most extensive and immediate mastery of her citizens over her soil, and on the compact unity of the body which thus acquired so firm a hold.